Welcome to the Identity Shift podcast, where we explore the real journey of becoming who you're meant to be. I'm Eileen Rouse, identity transformation coach, intuitive mentor, and creator of the 6 Divine Soul Shifts framework. For nearly 20 years, I've guided hundreds of women through emotional healing, spiritual awakening, and identity transformation. If you're a spiritually aware woman, navigating a season of change, questioning old roles, reclaiming your voice, or stepping into a version of yourself that feels more aligned, authentic, and powerful, then you're in the right place. Each week, we'll explore the mindset shifts, emotional breakthroughs, intuitive wisdom, and practical tools that help you stop people-pleasing, trust yourself deeply, set healthy boundaries, and step into the leadership, purpose, and life you're here to create. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's navigate this identity shift together. Welcome back to the Identity Shift podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Rouse. If you've ever found yourself thinking, I don't feel like myself anymore. Why am I questioning everything? Why does the life I've worked so hard to build suddenly feel off? Then I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not ungrateful, and you're not losing yourself. You may simply be outgrowing an identity that once served you. That is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Because one of the biggest misconceptions about transformation is that it is always exciting or that it always feels exciting. It doesn't. Sometimes transformation can feel confusing. Sometimes it can feel lonely. And sometimes it feels like you've lost your direction. But often what's really happening is that your inner world is evolving faster than your outer world. And that's what I call an identity shift. Today, I want to share 5 signs that you're navigating one. My hope is that by the end of this episode, you'll stop asking yourself what's wrong with me and start asking, who am I becoming? So let's dive in. Sign number 1. The things that used to fulfill you don't anymore. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's certain friendships. Maybe it's the routines you've had for years. Nothing is necessarily bad. It just doesn't light you up anymore. This can often create a lot of guilt. You start thinking, I should be happy. I worked so hard for this. I have a good life. But fulfillment isn't something we force. And before we go a little bit further, I want to share a little bit about my experience, especially in the aspect of the guilt you can often feel when something doesn't light you up anymore. And for me, it was in 2019 when I was standing on a stage in Las Vegas about to receive an award for something I had worked so hard for. Now, let me be clear. When I was working for this award, I wanted it. There was no doubt in my mind that it was something that I wanted. Therefore, I did what was necessary of me in order to fulfill it, to bring it to fruition. And I worked my ass off for this award. But the moment that I stood on stage at that time, the moment that that award was about to be handed over to me and my name was called, I had a very quick realization. I felt absolutely nothing in that moment. No excitement, no joy, no thrill, nothing. It was like I was dead inside. And I can't begin to tell you how much that sat with me for a very long time because I was like, what's wrong with me? Why does this not excite me anymore? Why is this something that I feel I have not been able to fulfill? Why is there no fulfillment in this experience? And so that's when I realized that fulfillment isn't something that we force. As we grow, what fulfills us changes too. So you change as you evolve. So I remember reaching a point in my corporate career where I realized I wasn't excited anymore. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved helping others, but something inside me was quietly whispering, there's so much more out there for you, Eileen. I want you to understand that it wasn't because my job was wrong. It was just simply that I had changed. Sometimes we mistake growth for dissatisfaction, but I want you to know that they're not the same thing. So sign number 2, you feel restless, even when nothing is technically wrong. This is a very common experience. From the outside, everything looks fine. Yet inside, you can't help but have this feeling that something is missing. You feel called towards something you can't quite explain. This is often where the women that I work with start doubting themselves. They think, maybe I'm just being dramatic. But what if your restlessness isn't a problem? What if it's an invitation? Restlessness is often your soul's way of saying you've grown beyond this version of your life. So pay attention. For me, in my corporate career, that was very evident. I was so bored at my corporate job. And I felt like there was nothing there that would excite me or that would thrill me about wanting to get up every morning and go into work. I was constantly looking for new things to excite me. It's almost like that moment when you go through a midlife crisis where you're just looking for all of those things that are thrilling and exciting, because I wanted something to activate that excitement, that thrill, that joy within me. And I realized, after being there for 20 something years, that I was no longer the person who walked into that corporate world way back when. I had evolved into someone entirely different. So sign number 3, you begin questioning everything. You start questioning the beliefs that you've held, the expectations that you've lived by, the roles that you've been playing. All of that starts to sort of come full circle. The definition of success that you've been chasing, you start to question that. You're like, why am I chasing something that I obviously don't even want? You start asking yourself questions like, do I actually want this? Or have I simply been living according to everyone else's expectations? For me, that was so evident and so huge. I can name at least 5 experiences in my life where I was literally in that space. So this happened to me during my own awakening when I began realizing how much of my identity had been built around being dependable. Not only dependable in my family, but in my corporate career. I was productive, I was being needed, and I was the one that everyone could count on. Now, I want to point out that none of those things were bad, but it wasn't the whole story. When we begin questioning our identity, it can feel uncomfortable. But I want you to know that questioning is what creates clarity. And clarity creates transformation. Sign number 4, your tolerance changes. You stop tolerating things that you once accepted. The conversations, the relationships, the constant people pleasing, the overcommitting, the self-sacrifice. People would often say that I've become less patient. I don't actually think that that was true. I think that I'd become more aware. Because when you become more aware, you're no longer willing to abandon yourself just to keep everybody else around you comfortable. That is growth. That's not selfishness. One of the biggest shifts I see in the women that I coach is this. They stop asking, how do I make everybody else happy? and they begin asking, what feels true for me? That question changes everything. Sign number 5. You feel called towards something bigger. Even if you can't explain what it is, maybe you start thinking about leaving your career or starting a business. Maybe it's writing a book. Maybe it's speaking. Maybe it's creating something, building something. Maybe it's leading. Maybe it's helping others. You can't fully see the path yet, but you know that you're meant for more. You know that you're meant to be doing something else. You know that there is a calling for you to rise into something that sparks joy, excitement, anticipation, exhilaration within you. And I believe this is where so many spiritually aware women find themselves. Many of these women that come to me have already done immense work in healing themselves. They've done the inner work, but now they're asking deeper questions. Now they're asking, how do I become the woman capable of living the life I know that I'm meant for? And that's what I love to hear. That's what excites me when I hear someone questioning, because now they're willing to see things clearly. That's the work I love. Because transformation isn't just about healing your past. It's about becoming the future version of yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest things. We often want to become better, but we want to feel like we're in alignment with that better. Now, I want to share a little bit of some client experiences that, I have worked with some of the clients that I've worked with through the years and some of their experiences. And in particular, there is one particular client that I can remember who came to me at a time was literally at the point where she was feeling completely, I don't want to say she was stuck, because she was definitely leading a very great life, but there were things that were no longer fitting for her. So she came to me because she was tired of performing strength. And when she came to me, she was just really trying to understand why nothing was falling into place for her. And the more that we talked, the more I realized that she needed a little bit more clarity and a little bit more guidance on what was keeping her stuck in an old identity that she was no longer in alignment with. And so she joined my 12-week program. And one of the amazing things that she gained from this program was she found her own ability to be able to not only see and understand, like she identified that she was always known as the strong one in her family, in her career, everywhere. She was known as the strong one. And she realized that once she shifted out of that role, she didn't know who to be without that role. And this is why she got stuck. She got stuck because she was still trying to operate from a role of being the strong one. But you see, what most people don't realize is that when you start experiencing one of these signs, you're already at the threshold of a new identity. You've already shifted into a new identity, and now you're needing to understand who you are in that moment and what you need in order to continue that path. And for this particular client, when she realized that she didn't know who to be, after discovering that she was no longer identifying as the strong one, that opened up a whole nother world for her. She also identified that, her childhood instability had her nervous system wired for loss. So she anticipated loss. Even in the moments of her greatest success, she was still expecting everything to just fall apart. And that was just a fear of scarcity that had come up from her childhood. Again, another identity that she had shifted out of, but her body itself didn't know how to respond to not being in that situation. So whenever she felt triggered by something that brought up that identity or that experience, all of a sudden, she was now being forced to understand that she was now that little girl once again. And so this is one of the reasons I feel that is so amazing and why it's important for you to understand what it is that you're experiencing and what it is you're feeling when you're going through an identity shift. So for my client, this was such an amazing experience for her. And she was so grateful that after our program, you know, she was able to create so many amazing opportunities for herself after this. But her biggest takeaway was that fear stopped being proof that something was wrong. It became more evidence of something old being triggered in her. And she was able to honestly and wholly be herself exactly where she was, regardless of what was transpiring outside of her. And so I think this is why I wanted to bring this topic up today. I've worked with hundreds of women over the past 2 decades, and there's one thing that I've noticed. Transformation is not random. There are patterns that show up in your life. There are stages that we move through. We move through stages of our own evolution as we evolve spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So you might have heard me talk about the 6 divine soul shifts or my intuitive intelligence framework. This is one of the reasons why I created this. And so this really aligns with my identity shift quiz that I created. The phases that we ultimately go through, they help us understand where we are, why we feel the way that we do, and what our next step is ultimately going to look like. We'll explore those more throughout this podcast because when you understand the season that you're in, everything starts making way much more sense. Before we finish today, I want to leave you with a few questions to reflect on. Where in your life are you feeling restless? What have you outgrown in your life? What part of your identity no longer feels true for you? And perhaps the most important question of all, who are you becoming? I want you to know that this is not about fixing yourself. It's about allowing yourself to evolve, giving yourself permission to evolve. So, my friends, if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to take my free quiz. What identity shift are you navigating right now? It will help you identify where you are in your transformation and what you need most in order to move forward. You'll find the link in the show notes. And if this episode spoke to your heart, I want to encourage you to please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a woman who needs to hear this message. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And remember, you don't need to become someone else. You simply need to give yourself permission to become who you've always been. As always, I will see you next week. Namaste, guys.